Welcome to What We Made Possible, the podcast where we explore the power of healing and driving change for advocates, leaders, and change makers. The conversations here draw the connection between creating new possibilities in the world, possibilities of care, of belonging, of thriving for our communities, with stories of personal healing and loving relationship building. I'm your host, Patty Dayleg, leadership coach for social change. I spent a decade in nonprofits, government, and DEI, securing 6- and 7-figure opportunities for communities of color. And I've experienced firsthand the transformative power of compassion, healing, and belonging in making a bigger impact. Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Welcome back. Today's episode is for my women of color leaders, especially those of you who've spent years surviving in predominantly white institutions or straight up toxic work environments. You might have been that person who worked twice as hard, navigated microaggressions daily, watched leaders who didn't look like you get rewarded for doing less and leading worse, and somehow you made it. Right? You got into a position of power, or maybe you created your own, right? Maybe you started your own organization, or you created your own position. And now everything feels heavier than you expected. You're doing your best to lead differently, to be the boss you never had. Maybe you're trying to be the opposite of your old boss, right? But maybe, just maybe, you're realizing that you've started to overcorrect and it's not really working. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So what does overcorrection look like? When I say overcorrect, here's what I mean. You take on everything: emotional labor, culture work, conflict mediation, because you want to protect your team, but you're burning out. You're so committed to being anti-hierarchical that no one actually knows who's making decisions anymore. You avoid giving feedback because you don't want to replicate harm, but someone else on your team ends up feeling harmed because nothing gets addressed, right? They feel like their concern went unheard. You want everyone to feel empowered, so you don't set clear direction, and now your team is stuck waiting for clarity that never comes. If any of that hits, please know you are not alone. I see this as a pattern again and again and again in my coaching work, and it's not a personal failure. It's a totally understandable response to the systems that we've survived. So why do we do it? Before we talk about why it doesn't work, I want to honor why it happens. Overcorrection is not a mistake. It's an attempt at healing, because every behavior, especially the ones that eventually burn us out, they start with a positive intention. We overcorrect because we're trying to do something right. We avoid hard conversations because feedback was once used to tear us down, right? We want to protect others from that harm. We hesitate to take up space as leaders because we've only seen leadership used to control or exclude. And so the intention is to create something freer, more just. We overfunction because we've seen what happens when women of color leaders make mistakes. We know how harsh the consequences can be. And so we protect our teams, we insulate our teams, we try to keep them safe. So if you see yourself in this, let's take a breath, offer yourself some compassion. Your instincts come from wisdom, from care, from survival. But here's what I want to gently offer you, is that the same tools that kept you safe in toxic spaces might not be the ones that'll let you thrive in this one. If your leadership is rooted in reaction, trying to be the opposite of what harmed you, then you're still letting those systems define you. You're still playing by their rules, just flipped. This aversion in yoga philosophy, it's considered a source of suffering, right? If we are pushing so hard against our old experiences, we want the opposite of that, then we are still orienting towards that thing. that thing that we don't want. And so that doesn't create liberation, right? That just creates a new kind of stuck. So why doesn't overcorrection work? This is the hard part, right? Care without clarity creates confusion. Avoiding hierarchy doesn't remove power, it just hides it. And folks who are in denial of their power, even though power dynamics exist in organizations, right, in teams, we have to be conscious of it and explicit about it and navigate it rather than hide it, right? It doesn't remove the power. Being endlessly nice is not the same as being just. And under leading doesn't create freedom, it creates chaos. I say this with a lot of love. Your team still needs leadership. They need direction, they need accountability, they need boundaries, because that is going to set them up for success and satisfaction in the work. And guess what? You can offer all of that without replicating the harm that you experienced. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I had a coaching client who really, really needed support on an event that she was putting together. And she wanted to ask for help, but she was so mindful of her team that she worked herself to the bone, to the point where her team was asking like, all right, like, what do you need? Just give it to us, right? And she was still hesitating to delegate. But the reason why is because she came from another team where she was delegated a project that was way outside of scope, out of her own scope. And then her old boss took credit for it, right? Even though she did all the work, her boss took all the credit, and that was harmful for her, right? It was a really hurtful experience. And so she did not want to replicate that. That's what held her back. The intention was to protect her team from the same experience that she had. But they saw what she needed, and they needed direction. They also wanted to be part of it, right? They wanted to be part of that success, and they wanted to support her. So here's what we can do instead. Instead of avoiding hard conversations, try leading with care and clarity, right? You have a team member who's missing deadlines, you know they're dealing with a lot personally, and you don't want to be, quote unquote, that boss, so you stay quiet. But the rest of the team is picking up the slack. Guess where resentment builds? Guess where the morale slips? It's in the part of the team that's picking up the slack, right? So what this can look like is you can say, I know you got a lot going on and I care about you. And we need to talk about what's not working because your role is essential to the team. Then it becomes a conversation about what is being negotiated, right? It can become a conversation of what are we delegating and what are we not? What slack needs to be picked up and what doesn't? And without just assuming that one person has to pick up everything for everyone else. So you name the behavior without attaching blame, and you invite collaboration on what support looks like, right? You choose honesty over avoidance. Next, instead of doing everything yourself, build shared leadership with real trust. So let's say you're prepping for a major grant report and you don't want anything to fall through the cracks. So instead of delegating, you rewrite whole sections of what your team already wrote. You double check every sentence, you stay up late doing just one more edit. But instead, you can pause and ask, what am I afraid will happen if I let this go? Then you bring your team in and say, this report is big. I'm feeling the pressure. I realized I was holding on too tight. Can we co-create a review process that builds trust and not stress? So you let go just enough to breathe. Instead of rejecting all hierarchy, you can create structure that's values aligned and not rigid. So you want everyone to feel seen and heard. Let's say that you run meetings where no one facilitates, right? The intention is that everyone feels seen and heard. There's shared leadership, right? You want a meeting where everyone shares ideas, shares decisions, but folks kind of disappear into the void, right? Things feel flat, but also stuck. So you can decide instead that shared power does not mean no structure. It means transparent structure. So maybe instead of having no facilitator, you rotate facilitation, or you clarify who makes what decisions. You define roles based on capacity and not control. And so now people feel held and not lost. And here's the last kind of example. Instead of trying to be the opposite of your worst boss, try asking, what does liberatory leadership look like for me? Maybe you were micromanaged, so you swing all the way to hands off. You hated being called out publicly, so you only give praise and no critique. You're doing everything your old boss didn't do, but it still doesn't feel right, right? So instead, you just take a beat, ask yourself, what do I believe leadership looks like when it's rooted in justice and care and community? It's not about being nicer and softer, although that might be part of it, right? It's about being more honest, more intentional. You can design your leadership from your values, not your trauma. So leadership that heals does not come from perfection, right? It comes from practice, from pause, from checking in with yourself and asking, am I leading from fear or am I leading from alignment? And every time you choose alignment, even imperfectly, you're building the kind of leadership we all need more of. So next time you can feel yourself overcompensating, right? Overcorrecting, slow down enough to ask, is this strategy coming from intention or reaction? Because when you're clear on that, your leadership stops being about fixing the past and starts being about building the future. I'm going to close and say that if no one has told you this lately, you are not a bad leader because you're still learning. You're not replicating harm just because you said no. You don't have to prove your goodness by overgiving. You're allowed to lead with care and power, with empathy and clarity, with love and boundaries. You are allowed to take up space, not because you've earned it 1,000 times over, though you have, but because that space is already yours. Thanks for being with me here today. If this episode hit home, send it to a fellow woman of color leader who's navigating the same tension. And if you're ready for support in your leadership, I'm just a DM away. See you in the next one. Thank you for listening to What We Made Possible. I really hope this episode resonated. As a coach, I always end with action steps. And so I invite you to do something, which is to pause and ask yourself, what resonated? What am I taking away? And what's possible for me and my community now? If you liked this conversation, please leave a review and a rating. It helps so much. Thanks again.